I want to ask you about an exception, little spoken of, that it seemed to me affected a major, perhaps, success of our gun laws, which said you had to be a resident. If you want to buy a gun, buy it in your state. This exception would have allowed residents of the District of Columbia to go to neighboring states, Maryland and Virginia, to buy handguns.
The law that says you should only be able to buy a gun if you live in that state is a good law, and it makes it harder for gun trafficking to occur, and it makes it harder for gun running to occur. And certainly anything that would weaken that law, such as the proposal with D.C. to say that a D.C. resident could go to Maryland or go to Virginia and be able to buy a gun out of state, would be a step backward in terms of dealing with gun trafficking. And, you know, in addition to a step backward, it would be an unfunded mandate on those states, because they don't have the resources to check records of D.C. individuals in terms of criminal history or other information that's known.
Well, that's a very important point. That somehow you push that responsibility onto another state using federal gun law authority.
A young man on my staff, Colin Goddard, who was shot 4 times at Virginia Tech, he's traveled to gun shows around the country, and he's with someone from that state, just because we want to make sure it would be legal. But they'd go in and they'd say, "Gee, don't have our license on us. You know, left it in the car, left it at home," and the person says, "Well, if you just tell me you've got an address here in Ohio or here in Texas, we'll sell it to you." Well, that makes it real easy, obviously, for someone to avoid this part of the law. And what happens in this country is that states that have good gun laws end up with less gun violence in those states, but the traffickers know then to go to Virginia to take the guns to New York, or they know to go to my state of Indiana and take the guns into Chicago. And that's because we have these other loopholes that allow people to get around this home state requirement that we've got in the gun laws.
So in effect, you really do have gun running from one state to another in this country. Yeah, in point of fact, almost every gun picked up in the District of Columbia comes from known contributors along the East Coast.
There's also a public health aspect to the restriction on interstate handgun sales, in that it allows states to control who can buy a gun, drives down dramatically overall gun death, because a large portion of gun death is not homicide, it's suicide or unintentional injuries. It's, for example, like California has a very extensive set of standards for who's under a disability for mental health reasons. And I'm certain that that's part of what keeps their gun death rates low, whereas if you look at a state like Louisiana that has virtually no restrictions on who can buy a handgun, their gun death rates are many, many times higher. So from a public health standpoint of district residents, speaking as a district resident, that's an added benefit to restricting handgun sales to interstate.
The D.C. Voting Rights Act would be law now if the gun lobby hadn't succeeded in attaching a bill that would have eliminated the district's gun safety laws.